World War II Rhine crossing changed the fate of Europe in ways most people still do not understand. History tells you it was a story of planning, discipline, and perfect coordination. But what if the final victory in Europe was shaped by something far more dangerous? Something closer to disobedience than strategy. Something that nearly destroyed the Allied alliance at the very moment of victory. In the final months of 1945, the Rhine River was not just water, it was myth. For centuries, military doctrine treated it as an untouchable barrier, a sacred defensive line. Napoleon struggled to cross it. German generals believed it could stop any modern army. Allied planners studied it for months. They treated it as the last natural shield protecting the heart of Germany. If the Allies failed here, the war could drag on for months, maybe longer. That meant hundreds of thousands more deaths. American, British, Soviet, civilian. And yet what happened on the Rhine shocked even those who planned the war, because the river did not fall the way it was supposed to. The official story celebrates careful preparation, massive artillery, perfect timing, airborne divisions, engineering brilliance. But behind the scenes, something else happened. One general ignored coordination. He ignored caution. He ignored his own superiors. He crossed the Rhine early, in secret, at night. And when the news reached Allied headquarters, it triggered a political and military crisis that could have fractured the coalition. What makes this story dangerous is not the crossing itself. It is the question it raised. Was victory achieved through discipline or through controlled chaos? To understand why this moment mattered, you need to go back 6 months earlier. Autumn 1944. Western Europe. One of the most ambitious operations of the war had just collapsed. Operation Market Garden. The plan was bold. Too bold. Airborne forces would leap deep into enemy territory. Bridges would fall one by one. The war would end before Christmas. Instead, the Allies suffered heavy losses. Arnhem became a symbol of overconfidence. Critics blamed reckless speed. Supporters blamed bad luck. But for one man, the failure was personal. He remembered every report, every casualty number, every accusation. He believed the lesson was simple. Wars were not won by improvisation. They were won by overwhelming preparation. For months, he designed the largest river assault in modern history. Tens of thousands of soldiers, thousands of artillery pieces, aircraft, engineers. Logistics measured down to the minute. Even the weather was calculated. Every detail mattered. The crossing would be unstoppable because nothing would be left to chance. And yet, 60 kilometers to the south, another commander looked at the same river and saw something completely different. He did not see a sacred barrier. He did not see centuries of military doctrine. He saw an opportunity. His army had been moving faster than anyone expected, so fast that supply lines struggled to keep up. German defenses were collapsing in confusion. Cities were falling before resistance could form. Prisoners were taken in waves. But speed created risk. Fuel shortages, exhausted troops, thin reconnaissance. His staff warned him to slow down, wait for orders, coordinate with the grand plan. But the reports from the front changed everything. Patrols reached the Rhine near a quiet German town. What they found shocked even veteran officers. The defenses were weak. Many German units had already shifted north. They expected the main Allied attack there. They believed the Americans would wait. That assumption would cost them. On the evening of March 22, 1945, a small group gathered around a map table. Some officers argued for caution. Others demanded approval from higher command. Crossing the Rhine without authorization was not just risky, it was insubordination. It could destroy Allied unity. It could trigger political outrage. But one question hung in the air. What if waiting cost more lives than acting? What if every day of delay meant thousands more deaths across Europe? The commander listened. Then he made his decision. That night, without massive artillery, without grand preparation, without ceremony, assault boats slipped into the dark water. Silence replaced explosions. Surprise replaced calculation. Within hours, the impossible happened. And when the Supreme Commander learned what had occurred, he faced one of the most dangerous leadership decisions of the war. Punish success or reward disobedience. Because what he chose would not only shape the end of World War II, it would redefine how modern wars are won. And by the end of this story, you may see victory in 1945 in a completely different way. Rhine River crossing was the focal point of Allied strategy in early 1945. Months of preparation had built a monument to military precision. British and Canadian forces amassed along the eastern bank, more than 80,000 strong. Artillery pieces stretched for miles, each one positioned with meticulous calculation. Engineers prepared pontoon bridges in England, prefabricated and tested, ready to be shipped and assembled. Airborne divisions, more than 16,000 paratroopers, were briefed and rehearsed. Every step, every movement, every second was timed. Weather forecasts dictated the operational windows. Fuel, medical supplies, rations, spare parts, everything was accounted for. Nothing left to chance. Yet 60 kilometers south, another Allied force moved with entirely different philosophy. George Smith Patton, commanding the Third Army, believed speed mattered more than ceremony. He had studied the Rhine but did not see a sacred barrier. To him it was a river, an obstacle to be crossed, not an emblem of history. His armored columns moved with lightning pace through northern Germany. Cities fell before German units could organize. Supply lines stretched but never broke, even as fuel and ammunition ran perilously low. Reconnaissance was thin, but Patton relied on instinct as much as intelligence. His officers urged caution, warned of overextension, advised waiting for Eisenhower's coordination. Patton disagreed. Patrols reached the Rhine near Oppenheim on the evening of March 22, 1945. They reported minimal German defenses. The northern bank was lightly guarded, many units having shifted to counter Montgomery's expected advance. The assumption by German commanders was simple. The main Allied assault would come from the north. Americans would wait. That miscalculation would prove decisive. Patton studied the reports, weighing risk versus opportunity. Waiting meant more German fortifications, more casualties. Every hour of delay could cost thousands of lives. He understood that in modern war, time was as lethal as firepower. By nightfall, Patton's staff gathered around the map table. Officers debated. Some argued for full authorization from higher command. Others pressed for immediate action. Crossing without orders was insubordination, a political and military gamble. But the question hung in the air. What if waiting cost more lives than acting? What if the river could be crossed silently, without alerting German defenses? The commander made his decision. Under the cover of darkness, without massive artillery barrages or preparatory bombings, assault boats glided across the Rhine. Silence replaced explosions. Surprise replaced meticulous calculation. Soldiers of the 5th Infantry Division crossed in small units, hugging the banks, moving swiftly yet carefully. Within hours, the Americans established a beachhead 300 meters deep. Engineers followed, constructing pontoon bridges with astonishing speed. By 4 a.m. on March 23rd, the first bridge was operational. Tanks, trucks, and infantry streamed across, bypassing the elaborate preparations Montgomery had orchestrated to the north. The contrast between Montgomery's methodical approach and Patton's audacious maneuver became clear almost immediately. While the northern crossings relied on overwhelming firepower and painstaking timing, the southern crossing relied on speed, instinct, and calculated risk. Casualties were surprisingly low, less than 100 in the first hours. German defenders were caught completely off guard. Communications had failed. Reinforcements were out of position. Patton's gamble paid off, reshaping the operational map of southern Germany in a single night. News reached Allied headquarters the next morning. Reactions were immediate. Montgomery was incredulous. To him, Patton's actions were reckless, a breach of discipline, a potential diplomatic crisis. Eisenhower faced a dilemma: punish disobedience or reward success. Yet the Third Army continued its momentum. Town after town fell with minimal resistance. Prisoners were taken in waves. Supply lines strained but held. By March 24th, Patton's forces had advanced farther than most planners anticipated, effectively redefining the pace of the campaign. Meanwhile, Montgomery's meticulously prepared Operation Plunder proceeded in the north. Artillery barrages, airborne landings, and engineer-led river crossings succeeded according to plan, but the comparison was stark. Both approaches achieved victory, yet the world would remember Patton for audacity and Montgomery for calculation. The Southern Crossing forced Allied command to reconcile two conflicting philosophies: discipline versus initiative, planning versus speed, ceremony versus improvisation. This duality posed a question still debated in military academies. Is victory achieved through meticulous planning or through bold, controlled risk? Patton's night crossing of the Rhine demonstrated that in modern warfare, success required not only preparation, but also the courage to seize fleeting opportunity. By the end of the operation, the Rhine had fallen, German resistance in the south was collapsing, and the Third Army surged forward with unprecedented momentum. History often focuses on Operation Plunder's methodical brilliance, yet it was Patton's decisive gamble that shortened the campaign in southern Germany by days, potentially saving thousands of lives. The audacity of crossing without permission, without ceremony, without the weight of artillery created a lesson in modern command. Leadership is measured not only by adherence to orders, but by the courage to act when every second counts. The Rhine River in March of 1945 was no longer a myth. For most commanders, it remained a symbol of discipline, of planning, of overwhelming preparation. But for one American general, it was an opportunity. George S. Patton saw the river not as a barrier, but as a chance to strike while the enemy slept. While Montgomery orchestrated Operation Plunder with meticulous timing, Patton's Third Army surged toward the same river, faster and more aggressively than anyone expected. Supply lines strained, troops were exhausted, fuel became scarce, but the pace was unstoppable. The German defenders near Oppenheim were scattered. Many units had been pulled north to face the British and Canadian assault. The Americans advanced, striking towns before organized resistance could form. Patrols reported weak positions, empty trenches, and abandoned fortifications. Patton's staff advised caution. Wait for orders. Coordinate with the grand strategy. Delay, they warned, might save lives. But Patton calculated differently. Waiting would allow the enemy to recover. Every day of hesitation meant more deaths across Europe. He understood that modern warfare demanded speed as much as precision. On the night of March 22, 1945, Patton gathered a small group around a map table. The discussion was tense. Some officers insisted on waiting for authorization. Crossing the Rhine without clearance could have been considered insubordination. It might have fractured Allied unity or provoked political outrage. Others argued that action was urgent. The river was weakly defended. German forces expected the British assault, not an American surprise. The choice was clear: act immediately or risk losing momentum. Patton chose action. He decided that the potential cost of waiting outweighed the risk of disobedience. Assault boats slipped into the dark water silently. There were no massive artillery barrages, no grandiose lighting displays. The operation relied entirely on speed, stealth, and surprise. Within hours, soldiers were on the northern bank, establishing a foothold 300 meters deep. Engineers moved swiftly, erecting pontoon bridges under minimal light. Communication lines were laid, and supplies flowed forward. The impossible had been achieved with astonishing efficiency. Casualties were surprisingly low. Fewer than 100 killed or wounded in the initial crossing. The Rhine, so long portrayed as an insurmountable barrier, had fallen in a single night. News of the crossing reached Allied headquarters. Reactions were mixed. Montgomery's meticulous planning for Operation Plunder remained intact in the north, but Patton's initiative in the south introduced a new dynamic. The supreme Allied commander faced a dilemma: punish a general for disobeying orders or recognize success. Discipline and coordination had been cornerstones of the Allied strategy, but here brilliance had bypassed bureaucracy. The choice was politically sensitive, yet strategically vital. Patton's gamble had accelerated the advance into Germany, saving potentially thousands of lives by ending the war faster. The morning of March 23rd revealed the full scope of the operation. Tanks and infantry crossed the pontoon bridges, pushing German units further back. Towns surrendered with minimal resistance. Prisoners were captured in waves. Supply lines stretched but held, allowing the Third Army to maintain relentless pressure. Speed had become a weapon, disrupting German defensive plans that assumed a slow, calculated approach. The contrast between Montgomery's northern crossing and Patton's southern maneuver was striking. One methodical, one audacious. Both contributed to victory, but in very different ways. This moment reshaped modern military thinking. It demonstrated that strict adherence to doctrine alone could not guarantee success. Initiative, calculated risk, and the ability to act decisively under uncertainty could redefine outcomes. Patton's crossing became a case study in controlled chaos versus disciplined planning. Historians still debate the balance between obedience and innovation. Could the Allies have achieved the same results without his audacity? Or would waiting for strict coordination have cost countless more lives? The debate underscores the fragile tension between hierarchy and initiative in warfare. By the end of March 1945, the Third Army was deep into southern Germany. The Rhine had been crossed in multiple locations, but Patton's southern maneuver was uniquely swift and effective. German forces crumbled under pressure. Towns fell daily. Bridges remained intact to support supply and reinforcements. Victory in Europe was accelerating, driven by a combination of meticulous planning and daring improvisation. The lessons of the Rhine crossing resonated beyond the battlefield. Speed, timing, and the courage to act could outweigh even the most elaborate preparation. And as the Allied armies pushed further into Germany, the question lingered. Was the war won by the careful orchestration of months-long planning, or by one general's willingness to bend the rules and seize opportunity? That night, the Rhine proved that leadership, not just logistics, could change the fate of nations. By the end of March 1945, the Rhine crossings were complete. Both Montgomery's meticulously orchestrated northern assault and Patton's daring southern maneuver had succeeded. The Allies now had a foothold deep into the heart of Germany. Cities that had resisted for months fell in days. German commands struggled to coordinate defenses against multiple rapid advances. The contrast between methodical preparation and audacious improvisation was clear for all to see. History would remember both operations, but the lessons went far beyond a simple victory. They revealed the tension between discipline and initiative in modern warfare. Montgomery, observing the results from the northern bank, maintained his composure publicly. Operation Plunder had achieved its goals with minimal loss and maximum precision. Artillery had pounded enemy positions, airborne forces had secured key points, and engineers had built bridges capable of sustaining the advancing armies. In private, however, he was frustrated. Patton's actions had bypassed chain-of-command protocols and threatened to undermine months of careful planning. For Montgomery, victory required order, coordination, and adherence to military hierarchy. The Southern Crossing had worked, yes, but at the cost of unpredictable variables that could have led to disaster. Patton, on the other hand, moved forward with a different philosophy. To him, the Rhine was not a sacred barrier, but a challenge to be exploited. His Third Army pressed into southern Germany with unprecedented speed. Towns surrendered before reinforcements could arrive. German forces were disoriented, unable to predict the American movements. By the end of April, Patton's units had advanced further into Germany than anyone anticipated. The Rhine, long seen as a natural defense, had been defeated not only by the weight of Allied resources, but by bold leadership that seized fleeting opportunities. The supreme Allied commander faced a delicate balancing act. Discipline mattered. Unity mattered. Yet at this stage in the war, results mattered even more. Eisenhower's decision to tolerate Patton's insubordination reflected a pragmatic understanding of leadership in wartime. Rules and protocols were critical, but they could not replace initiative. The war was won not by rigid adherence to doctrine alone, but by a combination of preparation, audacity, and the willingness to make difficult, sometimes controversial choices under pressure. The Rhine crossings offered enduring lessons. Military academies studied the operations for decades, debating the merits of strict coordination versus decisive improvisation. Could the Allies have achieved the same results without Patton's bold gamble? Or would strict adherence to Montgomery's plan have prolonged the war and cost thousands more lives? These questions remain relevant even today. Modern warfare is shaped as much by human judgment and leadership as by artillery, tanks, and supply lines. Victory is rarely determined by planning alone. It is often the interplay between order and initiative that decides the outcome. By the time German resistance crumbled in late April, the Rhine had been transformed from a legendary barrier into a symbol of both meticulous preparation and daring audacity. Montgomery's northern crossing exemplified discipline, while Patton's southern assault highlighted the power of speed and risk-taking. Together, they ensured the rapid collapse of German defenses. The Allies had learned that in modern war, success required a balance of both approaches, the rigor of planning and the courage to act beyond it. And so, as the Third Army marched deeper into Germany and the Allies prepared for the final push, one truth became clear. The outcome of the war in Europe was not solely the result of grand strategies or overwhelming resources. It was also the product of leadership capable of assessing risk, bending rules when necessary, and making split-second decisions that altered history. The Rhine had been crossed, not once but twice, in two very different ways, each shaping the future of Europe in ways that remain profound to this day. Ultimately, the story of the Rhine crossings challenges the conventional view of victory. Was it discipline, or controlled chaos that won the war? Perhaps it was both. Perhaps the river itself taught the Allies a lesson more enduring than any strategy, that preparation must coexist with initiative, and that history often favors those who dare to act when opportunity arises. And if you think this story ended with the river, think again. Across Europe, similar moments of audacious leadership and calculated risk reshaped the final months of World War II. If you want to see another example of a general defying convention to change history, watch our next video about the remarkable feats of the 101st Airborne in Bastogne.